Good afternoon. Welcome to the online lecture series, Mobility Analysis and Planning for Human-Scale Cities. The lecture series is organized by the Mobility Lab at the University of Tartu, together with Siiri Silm, Associate Professor in Human Geography. My name is Age Poom, and I'm an Associate Professor in Urban Environment. We run the lecture series now for the 5th time. And the aim of the series is to explore how data analysis and planning can foster sustainability transitions, support sustainable travel behavior, and shape high-quality and human-scale urban environments. This spring, our focus is on public transportation. The lectures address national and municipal approaches to the planning and governance of public transport, travel satisfaction, and travel behavior through targeted interventions, collaboration between public transit service providers in delivering journey planning and ticketing solutions, and the use of mobility data in modeling multimodal urban travel. Today, we are very glad to host here Professor Jonas de Vos from the Bartlett School of Planning at the University College London. Jonas is a professor of transport planning, and originally from Ghent University, he is now staying in the UK, and his research focuses on travel behavior, particularly on the links between travel and well-being, and travel and land use. Today's talk is entitled Determinants of Travel Satisfaction, from Travel Mode to Perceptions, and we are most glad to hear more from Jonas directly. So please, Jonas, welcome. The floor is yours.
Yeah, so good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Jonas de Vos. I'm currently a professor of transport planning at the Bartlett School of Planning, University College London. And today I will be talking about travel satisfaction and what the main determinants of travel satisfaction are. So I will be talking about trip characteristics such as travel mode and travel duration, but also more personal elements like attitudes, perceived accessibility, and so on, and discuss how they can influence travel satisfaction. So today I will start about the positive utility of travel. So a lot of studies have indicated that travel is wasted time, that it's a derived demand, and that we often want to minimize travel. But studies have also indicated that travel can have a positive utility, that people like to travel, at least to a certain extent. And because of that, it's possible that people like travel and that they're satisfied with their travel. So that's where travel satisfaction comes in. And this travel satisfaction can be influenced by travel mode, travel time, also the link between travel mode and time, but also more subjective or personal elements like attitudes, transport equity, and perceived accessibility. So I will start with a study of Daniel Kahneman and colleagues. So Daniel Kahneman is a Nobel Prize winner. And in 2004, he looked at the emotions that people experience during all kinds of daily activities. And so he looked at positive emotions, negative emotions, feelings of competence, impatience, tiredness, and so on. And he found that social activities and leisure activities are perceived most positively. And then if you go down, you see that there are more mandatory activities and household chores like shopping, preparing food, taking care of the children. There, the positive emotions are a bit lower. And then at the bottom, we have commuting, so traveling to and from work. And here they found that the level of positive emotions are relatively low. And of course, this is problematic because on the right, you can see that people on average travel 1.6 hours per day. So that's quite a considerable share of people's time that they spend commuting. And of course, you do not want that time to be spent or to be evaluated negatively. One of the reasons why commuting may be perceived negatively is that people regard this time as wasted time. So people want to reach their job. And because of that, travel can be regarded as derived demand. People travel to reach destinations, but not to travel itself. And that's why people may not always like traveling or commuting in particular. This is also a relatively old study from 2001 from the US, where they looked at people's actual one-way commute time and their ideal one-way commute time. So you see that the actual commute time is often between, let's say, 15 and 45 minutes. And people's ideal commute time is a bit lower, often between 10 and 25 minutes. So again, indicating that on average, people want to reduce their commute time. But if you look at the far left bar, so the white bar on the left, this indicates that only 2% of the people want a 0-minute commute. So this indicates that people like their commute at least to a certain extent. Not a lot of people want to really get rid of their commute. So this indicates that people do like certain aspects of their commute. And some studies have included an interesting test titled the teleportation test. And this test asks respondents if you could snap your fingers or blink your eyes and instantaneously teleport yourself to the desired destination, would you do so? And studies that have included this test often indicate that around 70% of the people want to be teleported. But this also means that 30% of the people prefers to travel. And this study from 2020 looked at this test in detail, and they found differences according to the chosen travel mode. So here you can see that car users, the majority of them wants to teleport. The same with public transport users, 66% of them want to teleport rather than spend some time commuting. But what is interesting here is that if you look at people who walk and cycle, you see that the majority, around 70%, would rather spend some time commuting. So this indicates that people who walk and cycle seem to like their travel somewhat more compared to people using motorized travel modes. And at the bottom, you can also see that travel perceptions play a role. People who think travel time is wasted time, not surprisingly, a lot of them want to teleport, while people who think travel can be useful, a lot of them would rather spend some time commuting. And in 2008, there was an interesting study of Jane and Lyons from the UK looking at the gift of travel time. And they indicate that travel time can be perceived positively because of three elements. So first of all, travel time can be regarded as transition time. So this means that people can use travel time to prepare for the activity ahead. So if you're traveling to work, you can prepare for a meeting that you will have at work. When you travel back home, you can start thinking about all your household chores or leisure activities that you will do in the evening. Travel time can also be time out. So this means that travel time can be one of the only times in a day that you're free from obligations. So you don't have to listen to your boss, you don't have to listen to your spouse or children. So often it's one of the only times that you're free from obligations and that you can listen to music, read a book, gaze out of the window if you're using public transport. And then finally, you can use travel time productively, especially if you use public transport. So if you use the train, for instance, you can work on your laptop, you can read certain documents. So in some cases, it is possible to use travel time productively. So this positive utility of travel indicates that people may enjoy travel, at least to a certain extent, and that they can experience positive emotions when they are traveling, and that sometimes they can also evaluate their trip positively. And it was Dick Ettema, a professor from Utrecht University, together with colleagues from Sweden who have developed the satisfaction with travel scale. So this was the first scale to measure travel satisfaction. And this scale asked respondents to indicate which experience or which emotions match best with their most recent commute trip or leisure trip. So this scale has 9 items. The first 3 go from negative deactivation emotions like bored, fed up, tired, to positive activation emotions, enthusiastic, engaged, alert. The next 3 go from negative activation emotions, such as stressed, to positive deactivation emotions like calm. And finally, there are 3 items that measure cognitive evaluation. And for instance, travel was the worst I can think of to travel was the best I can think of. So this scale has been used very frequently in a lot of studies that focused on travel satisfaction. And I also used this scale to measure satisfaction with the most recent leisure trip in Ghent in Belgium for my PhD research. So that was from 2012 to 2015. And here you can see how travel satisfaction is influenced by travel mode. So a lot of studies have looked at how the chosen travel mode can influence travel satisfaction, and results are often quite similar. So here you can see on the left the 9 items of the satisfaction with travel scale, and then all these numbers represent the average scores by travel mode. And if you look at walking, for instance, you see a lot of bold values. This means that these scores are significantly higher compared to the other travel modes. So people who walk are more enthusiastic, more alert, more calm, more relaxed, and also evaluate their trip more positively compared to people using other modes. For cycling, it's a bit mixed. Cyclists are enthusiastic, but they're not really calm or confident, indicating that they may see cycling as a somewhat dangerous activity. For public transport, unfortunately, we see a lot of italic values, meaning that it's significantly lower compared to other modes. So public transport users are less enthusiastic, less engaged, less alert compared to people using other modes. And also their evaluation is lower. And finally, car users are more engaged and confident, but their evaluation is lower compared to other travel modes. And at the bottom, you can see the combined scores for all the emotions on the left. So you see that, again, walking scores highest, 1.3 on average, significantly higher than all the other travel modes, while public transport average emotions are lowest, 0.9. So this is from -3 to +3. And also for evaluation, we see similar outcomes, but here we only see that walking is significantly higher than the other 3 modes, while public transport here is not significantly lower than car and cycling. So this is an outcome that other studies also have found. So most studies, they found that active travel is perceived most positively, and motorized travel, especially public transport, is perceived least positively. So I will not give you an overview of 20 papers or so, but this is also an interesting one, also looking at travel satisfaction and using the satisfaction with travel scale in Portland, Oregon. And here again, you can see that for positive deactivation, positive activation, and the evaluation, that walking and cycling scores best, and driving and public transport use has significantly lower values. And then another study also from Portland, Oregon, but using other data. I included this in the presentation because I think this is quite an interesting figure. So here, if you look at the blue bars, you can see that people who walk and cycle are very satisfied with their commutes. But people who drive and use public transport are also relatively satisfied if you look at the blue bars. However, if there is congestion and if it's crowded, you see that satisfaction levels drop significantly. So if you look at drive alone, if it is congested and people spend more than 40 minutes driving, then people are very dissatisfied. For bus users, if it's congested and crowded, you also see that people don't really like their bus trip. And then we have travel time. And again, quite a lot of studies have looked at the effect of travel duration on satisfaction. And most of them found that travel time has a negative effect on satisfaction. So the longer a trip takes, the lower satisfaction tends to be. So here again, outcomes from my PhD research in Ghent, focusing on leisure trips. And if you look at emotions, so the average values are in brackets. Here we see very limited differences according to travel time. So the differences are not significant. One of the reasons may be that I focus on leisure trips and not really on commute trips. So it is possible that people like leisure trips more than commute trips, so they don't mind having somewhat longer leisure trips. For evaluation, we did find significant differences. So trips longer than 20 minutes were evaluated less positively compared to leisure trips shorter than 20 minutes. So other studies found same outcomes. So this is one of the first studies looking at travel satisfaction from Sweden. So they looked at the most recent commute to and from work in 3 Swedish cities. So you see that for the short commutes, the average value is 1, again from -3 to +3. For medium, long commute times, it is pretty similar, 0.9, but for long commute times, it is significantly lower at 0.6. And then another interesting study that I want to show you here is a study from the Netherlands where they looked at average mood from 0 to 10 during the commute. And so apart from travel mode effects, they also looked at the length of commutes. So here you can clearly see that short commutes result in better moods compared to long commutes, and that you have a nice trend visible. The longer a commute takes, the less happy people seem to be. However, there is one exception here. This is a study where I was also involved. It's about travel satisfaction of undirected trips during COVID lockdown in Belgium. So undirected trips are trips without a destination. So this can be a walk, a bike ride, going jogging. So these can be regarded as recreational trips. And here we found that long trips have higher values for emotions compared to short trips. So here it's from 1 to 7. And so significant differences between long and short durations. Also, if you look at the evaluation, we see that long duration trips have an average value of 5.9, which is considerably higher than the evaluation of short trips with an average value of 5. So this can be explained by the fact that these undirected trips are undertaken for its own sake. They have a value in itself, while commute trips, for instance, are often undertaken to reach the job location. They don't really have a value in itself. So this may explain the differences in terms of travel duration. And then in the recent study, I didn't only want to look at actual commute time, but I also wanted to look at the relationship between actual commute time and ideal commute time on the one hand, and the link between actual commute time and maximum tolerable commute time. Because it's likely that travel satisfaction is high when people's actual travel time is close to their ideal travel time and becomes lower once the actual commute time gets closer to the maximum tolerable commute time. So this was the hypothesis that I wanted to analyze in the study. So for this study, I used data from a recent survey I did. Well, it was from 2023, so 3 years ago, where the respondents are students and staff of UCL. So I asked information about their most recent trip to campus and also how they perceived that trip. And here you can see the actual ideal and maximum tolerable commute durations per travel mode. So these are the three public transport modes. And for public transport modes, you see that the actual duration is closer to the maximum tolerable duration than to the ideal duration. So if you look at bus tram, for instance, the ideal duration is 26 minutes, the actual duration is 44 minutes on average, and the maximum tolerable duration is 52 minutes. And if you look at the train here, the situation is even worse, I would say. Here we see that the actual commute time, 85 minutes, so 1 hour and 25 minutes one way, is even longer than the maximum tolerable commute time. So this indicates that people who travel by train to UCL, they have very long commutes, longer than they really want to. But for walking and cycling, the situation is different. Here we see that the actual duration is closer to the ideal duration than it is to the maximum tolerable duration. And so for walking, the ideal duration is 19 minutes, actual duration is 26 minutes, and the maximum tolerable duration is 41 minutes. So then I looked at the average commute satisfaction. This is a scale from 1 to 5. According to the commute time, but also according to the gap between actual and ideal commute and the gap between the maximum tolerable and actual commute. So if we just look at actual commute time, we see that for all travel modes, the shorter the trip, the more satisfied people are with their commute. But we also see a trend if you look at actual and ideal commute time. So people who have an actual commute time close to their ideal commute time are more satisfied with their trip compared to people who have an actual commute time, which is, for instance, 21 minutes or more longer than the ideal commute time. And then finally, we also see that people who have an actual commute time, which is considerably lower than a maximum tolerable commute time, those people are also more satisfied with their trip compared to people who have a commute time close to the maximum. And we see, for instance, here, if you have a commute which is more than 21 minutes shorter than the maximum tolerable commute time, the average score is 3.4. While it's 2.7 for people who have a commute time close to the maximum tolerable commute time. And then I did a regression analysis with travel satisfaction or commute satisfaction as the dependent variable. I also included personal characteristics, attitudes, trip characteristics as independent variables. And then I also included actual commute time, actual minus ideal commute time, and maximum tolerable commute time minus actual commute time as independent variables. And here you can see that if you look at actual commute time, we see that actual commute duration only has a limited impact on commute satisfaction. So compared to the very short trips of 0 to 15 minutes, it's only trips longer than 90 minutes that are perceived less positively. So rather weak effects here. But if you then look at the link with ideal commute time, we see that trips that are 21 minutes or more longer than the ideal commute time, these trips are have a negative impact on satisfaction. And we also see that trips which are considerably lower than the maximum tolerable commute times, these trips have a positive effect on satisfaction. So having a commute duration close to the ideal or far below the tolerable duration seems to play a more important role than the actual commute duration. And so a lot of studies have looked at travel time and travel modes separately, but I think it's also important to look at them together because travel time and travel mode are often linked to each other. Active trips are often short in duration, while public transport trips are often have long durations. So it's possible that the effect of travel modes on travel satisfaction is attenuated by travel duration, and that it's actually travel time that is the true predictor of travel satisfaction and not so much travel mode. So here I use data from Ghent again for my postdoc research. So that was from 2015 to 2019. And here you can see that the commute duration differs according to travel mode. So on the left, we have the car. And if you look at the people who mostly or always travel by car, you see that it's quite mixed. You have people who drive with short durations, but also car users with long durations. For public transport users and especially train users, it's very differently. So train users who always use the train, you see that more than 70% of them have a commute of more than 45 minutes. And for people who walk or bike, it's a bit the opposite. More than 50% of them have a commute less than 20 minutes. So considerable differences in commute duration by travel mode. And then I looked at commute satisfaction according to duration and mode use. So I performed two-way ANOVAs in order to measure both the effect of duration and mode frequency on satisfaction. So for bus, tram in the middle, train on the right, and walking, bottom right, I found negative effects of duration. So the longer a trip takes, the less satisfied people will be. If you then look at car on the left, here again, we see that duration has a negative impact, but we also found that car frequency has a significant effect. And here it was a negative effect. So people who mostly or always drive, they are less satisfied compared to people who never drive. And here we also found interaction effects. And this means that the effect of car frequency on commute satisfaction is only significant for trips shorter than 45 minutes. So for very long trips, car frequency does not play a significant role. And then finally, cycling frequency at the bottom left. Again, we found that duration has a negative effect, but we also found that cycling frequency impacts satisfaction. And here we found a positive effect. So people who mostly or always cycle are more satisfied compared to people who never or rarely cycle. And again, we found interaction effects, meaning that the effect of cycling frequency on satisfaction is only significant for trips between 11 and 45 minutes. So for the very short trips and the very long trips, cycling frequency does not have a significant impact. And then I performed 3 regressions in order to see what affects travel satisfaction most, travel time or travel mode. So in the first model, apart from sociodemographics, I only included mode frequencies. In the second model, I only included commute duration. And in the third model, I included both mode frequency and commute duration. So if you look at the first model, you see that especially for car and train frequency, there is a negative impact on satisfaction and a bit more modest positive effect for walking. And here at the bottom, you can see that R square is 0.26. So this means that 26% of commute satisfaction is explained by sociodemographics and mode frequency. In the second model, I removed the mode frequency and included commute duration measured in minutes. And here you see that there is a very strong negative impact of commute duration. So the T statistic is minus 28. So this is a very strong negative impact. And here you see that R square is 0.38. So 38% of commute satisfaction is explained by mainly commute duration. So this indicates that one variable representing commute duration explains more than all the mode frequencies combined in model 1. And then if you go to model 3, where both duration and mode frequency are included, you see that commute duration still has a very strong negative impact, while for the mode frequencies, it's only car frequency that keeps its relatively strong negative impact. And then I also used another approach. So here I used 5 models, one model for the very short trips, one model for the trips 11 to 20 minutes, and so on. So I did this in order to control for commute duration. And here, if you look at the effects of mode frequency, you see again that it's only car frequency that has a negative and significant impact. For the rest, effects are quite modest. We only found negative effects of bike frequency for the very long trips, but for the rest, it's all quite modest. So this indicates that when you control for travel duration, travel mode is not that important anymore. So basically, the study indicated that duration has a stronger effect on commute satisfaction than travel modes, and that the effect of travel mode is mainly moderated by duration. So after controlling for duration, only a negative effect was found of car frequency on commute satisfaction. And this also indicates that satisfaction differences between active travelers and public transport users can be explained by short active trips and long public transport trips. So this indicates that public transport in itself may not be dissatisfying, but it's mainly because public transport trips are longer than active trips that they are often perceived as not so satisfying. So that was about the effect of trip characteristics on travel satisfaction. But it's also possible that personal and subjective elements can also influence travel satisfaction. So for instance, travel attitudes can play a role, but it's especially the extent to which attitudes are in line with travel behavior that can influence travel satisfaction. So if there is a mismatch or a dissonance between attitudes and behavior, this may result in feelings of discomfort. And this is based on an old theory from social psychology, the cognitive dissonance theory. So if you look at travel behavior and the travel mode choice, if people travel with a mode which is not the preferred travel mode, then this can be regarded as travel mode dissonance, which can result in low levels of travel satisfaction. And in this case, people have 2 options. They can either try to change their travel mode, so use another travel mode. But when that would not be possible, they can also try to change their attitudes. So for instance, a person who is forced to drive, that person may say, okay, in the end, driving is not so bad. It's actually quite convenient. So a person may try to justify its choices by changing attitudes. And when a person is able to change their travel mode or change their attitudes, then travel mode distance may go down and satisfaction may go up. And I try to analyze this again using my data in Ghent for my PhD. So in this study, I looked at the travel mode that people use, but also their mode preferences. So I asked people which positive elements they linked with different travel modes, such as convenient, healthy, safe, and so on. And the mode with the most positive elements was regarded as their preferred travel mode. So in this sample, I had 883 car users, and 305 of them had a clear preference for driving. So 305 car users can be regarded as constant travelers, but we also see that there are quite a lot of them who want to cycle, for instance. If you then look at public transport users, so there are 117 public transport users, and we see that only 16 of them have a clear preference for public transport. So this indicates that most public transport users actually want to use other travel modes, especially cycling and walking. For the cyclists, we see that the majority of them have a preference for cycling. So here, most people are constant travelers. And for pedestrians, we see that a substantial share of the pedestrians has a preference for walking, but we also see that quite a lot of them actually prefer to cycle. And this consonance or this dissonance has a significant impact on travel satisfaction. So here we have consonant versus dissonant car users. So the consonant car users, so these are the car users who prefer to drive. They have significantly higher values for evaluation and positive activation compared to the car users who actually prefer to use another travel mode. And we see the same for public transport users. So public transport users who like to use public transport, so this small group, we see that they're actually quite happy with their trips. And again, for evaluation and positive activation, we see that this difference between the dissonant public transport users is significant. For cycling, we see the same outcome, but here it's for evaluation and deactivation where the differences are significant. And finally, for pedestrians, we see that both consonant and dissonant pedestrians seem to be relatively happy with their trip. So here there are no significant differences. And then another study from Xi'an, China, in which I was also a co-author. We also looked at the mismatch between actual and ideal commute duration. So for people who have a commute duration close to the ideal, we see that satisfaction levels are quite high, around 1.2, between -3 to +3. But once the commute duration becomes significantly longer than the ideal commute duration, we see that satisfaction levels go down. So for people who have a commute duration more than 30 minutes longer than the actual commute duration, satisfaction levels become very, very low. So again, indicating that a dissonance between attitudes and behavior can result in low travel satisfaction scores. And then we have transport equity. So transport equity is about differences in travel options between various people. So often people living in low income households, they have limited travel options. They do not always own a car. They have limited access to public transport. They do not have a lot of activities nearby. So for them, yeah, it's difficult to travel in a desired way, and this can have negative impacts on their travel satisfaction levels. So transport equity, it is sometimes measured in an objective way, looking at household car ownership and distance to public transport, for instance. But in this study, with the UCL students and staff, I wanted to measure transport equity in a perceived way. So in the survey, I asked respondents to what extent they agree on the 9 statements that you can see here. And these statements, they refer to travel options and being able to travel in a desired way. So I performed a factor analysis resulting in 2 factors. So the first factor refers to travel freedom. This is mainly related to travel options. And the second factor refers to desired travel. And this is about whether people can travel in a desired way and whether they have longer travel durations than desired or whether they spend more money on travel than desired. And this perceived transport equity is positively affected by access to public transport and having rental e-bikes available, but also by travel disability. So if you have a disability that hampers your transport, it will negatively affect travel freedom. And also people who live in Greater London, they have higher levels of travel freedom and desired travel compared to people living outside of Greater London. And then I looked at how desired travel and travel freedom can impact travel satisfaction. And I found that both factors have a significant positive impact on travel satisfaction. So the more options, the more travel options you have available, and the more you are able to travel in a desired way, the happier you will be with your commute. And in the study, I also performed a cluster analysis based on the 2 factors, desired travel and travel freedom. And this resulted in 4 clusters. So we have one cluster, desired choice travelers with positive values on both factors. So these are people who have a lot of travel options available and who are able to travel in a desired way. And then at the other side, we have the undesired captive travelers. So these are people who do not have a lot of travel options, people who have difficulties traveling in the desired way. And then in between, we have 2 clusters, desired captive travelers and undesired choice travelers. And then I looked at how travel satisfaction differs according to these 4 clusters. So you can also see that travel mode and travel duration is very different for the 4 clusters. But at the bottom, you can see that travel satisfaction on a scale from 1 to 5 significantly differs between the 4 clusters. So if you look at cluster 4, the undesired captive travelers, they have an average travel satisfaction score of 2.5. So this is lower than the midpoint of 3. So these people are actually dissatisfied with their travel. While if you look at cluster 2, for instance, so people with a lot of travel options and who are able to travel in a desired way, they have relatively high travel satisfaction scores. And then the last element that I will discuss is perceived accessibility. So in the past decades, quite a lot of studies have focused on accessibility, so how easy it is for people to reach a destination. But most of these studies have focused on objective elements. So they often measured accessibility based on land use mixture, population density, and so on. But of course, accessibility is also influenced by personal elements like attitudes, preferences, but also people's abilities and skills. So whether they are able to drive a car or ride a bike. And also it can be affected by the travel options that people have available. So because of this, quite a lot of studies are now focusing on perceived accessibility, which is more about the perceived ease of reaching destinations. And this can also influence travel satisfaction. So the easier you think it is to travel and reach destinations, the more satisfying a trip may be. So a a couple of years ago, I was involved in a study that looked at perceived walkability, so how easy it is to walk around and reach destinations on foot. And one of the goals of this project was to analyze how perceived walkability affects walking satisfaction. So first, we measured perceived walkability based on 15 statements, which you can see on the left. So there are 5 statements referring to recreational walking, 5 statements referring to walking to destinations, and 5 statements referring to walking to public transport stops. And we did a factor analysis resulting in 3 types of perceived walkability. So the first type refers to perceived recreational walkability. Then you have perceived walkability to destinations, so how easy it is to walk to destinations. And then finally, we have perceived walkability to public transport stops, so how easy or convenient is it to walk to public transport stops. And we looked at this perceived walkability in 3 European cities. That was Gothenburg in Sweden, Dortmund in Germany, and Genoa in Italy. And here you can see that perceived walkability has a clear and significant impact on walking satisfaction. So people with high values of perceived walkability, so people who think it is easy to walk to destinations or easy to walk to public transport stops or easy to walk recreationally, those people have significantly higher walking satisfaction scores compared to people with low levels of perceived walkability. And then we also did a regression analysis where we looked at the impact of the different types of perceived walkability on walking satisfaction, while also controlling for social demographics, attitudes, trip characteristics. And again, here we found that all 3 types of perceived walkability have a significant and positive impact on walking satisfaction, even when controlling for other elements. So to conclude, so in this presentation, I showed you that trip characteristics like travel mode, travel duration can impact travel satisfaction, but also that transport equity, both objectively or measured subjectively, can impact travel satisfaction, and that perceptions such as travel attitudes and perceived accessibility can also play a role in terms of travel satisfaction. Of course, we have to keep in mind that travel mode and travel duration can also impact travel attitudes and perceived accessibility, and that in turn, transport equity can also impact travel mode and duration. So the determinants of travel satisfaction may be related with each other and can influence the effect on travel satisfaction. And of course, travel satisfaction may also impact subjective well-being, like life satisfaction, but also job satisfaction or satisfaction with the activity at the destination. So that was my final slide. So here are all the studies that I included in this presentation. And yeah, I want to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonas. Very, very interesting study and very in-depth on the travel satisfaction and how it also differs between different travel mode users, which is of course very interesting to us as well. I have quite a number of questions, but I would like to first offer the opportunity to ask from our in-present audience here in this room. Who would like to give a start?
If no one is not starting, then I start. Thank you for this presentation, and I think it was a lot of facts there and a lot of information that I'm not sure that I have. I think I have to look at it many times to get all this information what you provided. But I have one question that have you also studied the changing of the satisfaction? I mean, not in you were there based on the distance and the different parameters, but I mean more about for at the time the people have used this travel mode. For example, if for example starting to commute, for example 1 day or a week or years or 10 years, is it also, have you studied in this aspect of on this satisfaction?
Yeah, I don't fully understand your question. So you mean
I mean that during this the satisfaction, how it
yeah.
changes for during this for example this commuting period, for example the starting to use this travel mode, and or you have used it like many years, or in this aspect that if you haven't studied then it's like okay also.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure if there are a lot of studies that have analyzed it. I think there are some studies that look at what happens if people change their travel modes. And I think often when they start, they are quite happy with that new mode, and then after a while, satisfaction levels drop a little bit. But there are not that many studies that look at that. There are some studies that have looked at, well, for instance, I analyzed this. What happens if people move to a new residential location and because of that change their travel behavior? And I found that people who switch from car use to active travel, that they become more satisfied with their commutes, and people who do the other, who switch from active travel to car, for instance, they become less satisfied. So if there is a switch in mode use, then there is a drop or an increase in travel satisfaction.
Okay. And then as I one comment or idea that for your last slide that you had this travel satisfaction is influencing the general well-being. But in my mind, I think that maybe it is in opposite way, that your general well-being is influencing how is your travel satisfaction, and also maybe the travel mode use or these other aspects. What do you think about this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually analyzed this in one of my studies, and I found that yeah, there is a positive correlation between travel satisfaction and life satisfaction. Of course, it's a bit difficult to measure in which direction it goes because here I use cross-sectional data and not longitudinal data. But I did try to measure it using structural equation modeling, and I did find stronger effects of life satisfaction on travel satisfaction than vice versa. So your assumption is seems to be correct. So it seems that people who are happy with their life are also happier with their travel. But it is difficult to measure if you don't really have longitudinal data. But results indicate that they are positively correlated with each other.
But there is a coming third question that have you done this longitudinal studies that you have measured the same people during the or same like type of people to the same areas or?
No, I haven't really done longitudinal surveys myself because it's quite time consuming and often quite expensive to do so. Yeah, unfortunately, the number of longitudinal panel data is limited. There are some of them exist, but often they have limited questions on travel satisfaction. So I'm not really aware of any longitudinal study that looked at travel satisfaction over time and the relationships with other elements over time. So yeah, unfortunately, I have not done that yet.
Okay, thank you. I think it's a very interesting topic to discuss further. Do you have other questions, or I can ask?
Yeah, why not? Jonas, I was wondering also, what are the relations with residential self-selection, travel attitudes, and then travel satisfaction? So have you considered or asked residential self-selection questions in relation to your research object?
I have analyzed residential self-selection in the past, but I never really linked it to travel satisfaction. But I think here I measured travel mode dissonance and travel mode consonance. So I think that's also a bit of self-selection, not really in terms of the residential location, but in terms of the travel mode. So if people are able to use the travel mode that they like, then they are more satisfied compared to if they use a mode that they don't like. But I haven't really looked at the link with residential self-selection. There are some studies that looked at the effect of the built environment on travel satisfaction, but most of them did not find strong impacts. There is one interesting study that did not find direct effects, but they did find significant indirect effects. So people who live in a dense urban neighborhood, they walk more, and because they walk more and because they have shorter durations, they are more satisfied. So the built environment seems to have an indirect effect on satisfaction via travel mode and travel duration.
Yes, I'm just wondering, when you also talked about transport or this equity aspect and the perceived accessibility aspects, which were also defined, among others, by the access to public transit services or the number of nearby destinations. So in suburban sprawl areas or in sparsely populated areas, these factors are not so well provided, right?
Yeah.
But people might prefer those areas and like as a residential self-selection aspect. So it's not that they do not have like the means to live elsewhere, but they prefer to live there. So the transport provision changes. So is that then linked to this travel attitude, like travel mode self-selection? So
yeah. It may be a bit of a trade-off. So people may prefer to live in the suburban or rural areas. So they like the environment there. But of course, that may mean that they have longer travel durations. So people may make trade-offs. So maybe they're not that satisfied with their commute, but they are very satisfied with their residential location. So they because of that, they are okay with their low levels of travel satisfaction because they are able to live in rural areas. So I guess people trade off these types of elements, their residential location and their commute patterns. So I think sometimes there is a trade-off between both of these.
Yeah, that definitely can be the case. You also presented several studies which were made in a comparative manner, like in different countries, the same study, similar sampling, I assume. So can you say that actually your findings are quite universal, at least in European context? So it doesn't matter whether you do it in a very cycling-oriented country and culture, as in Belgium, or in Italy, or then in Sweden with a different climatic context, etc.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, in Belgium, active travel was regarded positively, but also in studies in the US, a country that is not really very bike friendly, they also found that cycling was perceived more positive than car use and public transport use. So it seems that yes, cycling itself is satisfying, but of course it is possible, as I showed in the presentation, that the short durations of cycling trips are one of the reasons why people like them. But overall, it seems that the context does not always have a strong impact on how different travel modes are perceived.
Yes, that's interesting. You can say that there are these kind of universal rules that you have found. But when you think about like improving our travel satisfaction by different governance or planning measures, so what kind of interventions or policy measures would you suggest which have the strongest effect on travel satisfaction? And perhaps to narrow down it, as we are focusing more on public transit in this year's lecture series, could you suggest something in those lines?
Yeah, I think maybe first, I think we could focus more on like compact mixed-use neighborhoods, like the 15-minute city is also very popular in that context. So if you have more people living close to each other, more activities nearby, that means that travel duration can go down, and it also means that more destinations are accessible by walking and cycling. So I think, creating compact neighborhoods is one option. Also, transit-oriented developments would be good. So creating compact neighborhoods around public transport stops so people can easily also use public transport. And then specifically for public transport, I think there are some elements like, as I also showed you, that crowdedness is often perceived negatively, congestion. So I think if you have frequent services which are not often delayed, and if you make sure that the transfers are convenient, and the vehicles are comfortable and there is enough seating capacity, I think that can also improve satisfaction with public transport trips.
Yes, it seems so. Yes, do we have questions here from the audience or online audience? I see that there are no questions so far from online members, but here? We are currently running or developing a mobility model prototype for the whole Estonia, and these travel satisfaction topics are in a way also related to the value of time that people might assign to their trips. So when we are making the utility functions and assuming where people with travel modes they might take to go to any of their destinations, then this kind of value of time is of important. Are there any studies to know which have linked this travel satisfaction to the perceived value of travel time?
Not really, but I think it can play a role. Of course, the higher the value of time, you may think the lower satisfaction may be, or the more important travel duration may be. So if you have a high value of time, then if you have a long commute, then you may be very dissatisfied with your trip. So I guess it can impact the effect of travel time on travel satisfaction, but I'm not really aware of any study that looked at that.
Okay, yes, interesting. So finding gaps in this research field. Yeah. I also wondered, like you had taken into consideration also personal characteristics, like the typical socio-demographic characteristics. But what about also different like cultural insights, or for example, how long people have been living in that country, or like whether they are familiar with the system overall. Or for example, you had studied the frequency of using different modes, like very rarely or very often. But also this might be related to, like in case of public transit again, if you do not know the ticketing systems or the routing systems or when the travel, when the buses are scheduled, etc. So that might increase our discomfort with this travel mode, so that just that we are not experienced. So is this kind of, being familiar to the system also a factor in this travel satisfaction?
I'm not really aware of studies looking at familiarity with public transport systems. There are some travel satisfaction studies that really focus on public transports, looking at which elements influence travel satisfaction, but I'm not sure if they also include familiarity. But I know for public transport that satisfaction is affected by a lot of different elements. It's about in-vehicle comfort and capacity, but it's also about ticketing systems and the waiting conditions and the behavior of the driver. So I know for public transport that satisfaction is influenced by a wide range of elements. But I don't know any study that really looked at familiarity with the system.
Yes, okay. Your studies are mostly or almost always conducted by like a questionnaire, right? A questionnaire type of approach. Are you also familiar whether in this field of research, like other data types are used? For example, if you have an activity-based study by smartphones, and then there are some pop-up questions coming up now and then, and you actually can monitor or track the behavior. You can monitor also the actual use of different travel modes, and then people are also asked how satisfied they are, for example, or what are their emotions about this trip. Have you come around on such kind of studies?
Yeah, there are some studies that have used smartphone apps. I think there was one in Sweden with Margareta Freeman and colleagues. So they focused, I think it was on bus users and people on the bus. They had to indicate, I think, before, during, and after the trip, which emotions they experienced. And I think they used the satisfaction with travel scale, but a shortened version of that. And then I think they also looked at if emotions change during and after the trip. So it is possible to use other methods, but of course, online surveys are the most common ones. But some have used smartphone apps.
Yeah, okay. We have also now a few questions on chat.
Yeah, I can read some of this. Regarding the positive utility of travel and the fact that loan car drivers usually have lower travel satisfaction than driving with company, I would like to know how the type of company in the vehicle affects travel satisfaction. For example, traveling with kids, value that and or the co-workers or friends or a bolt car sharing with random of these companies.
Yeah, so in one of my surveys, I also asked them if they traveled alone or together with friends or partner. And I found that traveling alone results in lower travel satisfaction values compared to traveling together with other people. And some other studies found similar outcomes. So if you travel alone, on average, satisfaction levels will be lower. In terms of children, so here, yeah, the question is parents traveling with their kids. So parents valuing their time higher. But I know there are some studies that focus on children, and mostly I think they value bus trips together with other children more than car trips with parents. But overall studies, well, there are not that many, but the studies that have analyzed it indicate that traveling alone is less satisfying compared to traveling with friends, family, partner, and so on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Then we have also another question. So that you have studied that higher satisfaction is observed for walking and cycling, but it can be driven by self-selection. That's a question then. And how do you address the causal ordering between mode choice and satisfaction? Also, do you think subjective and objective built environment effects are mediated through mode choice and travel satisfaction?
Yes. So the causal effect between mode choice and satisfaction. Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, overall active travel seems to be more satisfying. But of course, if you are very satisfied with using a certain mode, you will try to use that mode again in the future. But then the question is, why do people who use public transport keep using public transport even if it's unsatisfying? So this may indicate that a lot of the public transport users are captive users. So they use it because they are forced to use it. They don't use it because they want to use it. So that may be a possible explanation there why public transport satisfaction is lower compared to walking and cycling satisfaction. And then the other element, do you think subjective and objective built environment effects are mediated through mode choice and travel satisfaction? I think, let me think. So perceived accessibility. Yeah, I think if you are, let's say, a frequent cyclist, then it is likely that you will find activities easier to access by bike compared to a person who never cycles, for instance. Or if you really like to cycle, so if you're satisfied with cycling, then again you may think certain destinations may be easier to access by bike compared to people who do not like to bike or who are very dissatisfied with cycling. So I guess here again there are a lot of relationships between subjective and objective built environment and mode choice and travel satisfaction, and often these effects are bidirectional. And again, it's often a bit difficult to measure the true causality, especially if you don't have longitudinal data.
Yeah, that's true. And let's also take the last question we have here. So this is a thought from one of the persons in the online audience that if recreational trips have higher value on emotional health than the everyday commuting trips, that can it be that the environment that makes people to choose to make those undirected trips, that the environment itself is better when they do their recreational trips. So that's why also their satisfaction with those trips is higher. So that what the person thinks is that if the everyday commuting environment would also be better, then also their satisfaction could be better.
Yeah.
So it's the built environment effect on travel satisfaction.
Yeah, of course, commuting is kind of a mandatory type of trips. So people do it to reach their job. And often also time is a bit limited in the morning and the evening. So I think if people go to work, they often choose the fastest and most direct route, which is not always the one going through nature, for instance. While if you have undirected trips or recreational trips, often you have more time available, and because you perform that trip for the trip itself, you want to have a pleasant trip, of course, and then you choose aesthetically appealing environments. So I think there is these are different types of trips. One is mandatory and often rushed, and you go for a direct route, while the undirected trips are non-mandatory. People do it because they like it, so they have more freedom in terms of route and time.
Yeah, exactly. So the undirected trips are, you have the freedom. I think this is exactly the thing, that you choose the environment where to go, while where you do your commuting work, you actually can't choose the destination. But of course, route choice, perhaps you can alter, and you can alter your travel satisfaction also by the route choice, especially when you walk or you cycle. But with this, this note, we are now closing our today's session. So great, a big applause to you, Jonas. Thank you very much for this very insightful presentation and lecture. It's and rich of references to study further. Next presentation will take place on the 23rd of April this year, so in a couple of weeks, not next week. And that lecture will be given by Gerhard Wennerström from Samtrafiken, Sweden. And Gerhard will talk about interoperable ticketing and the realities of shared sales in public transport. So basically he will talk about how private public transport operators or different public transport operators collaborate in Sweden in their ticketing and sales systems to offer commuters and public transit users a better service and interlinked trips. So very much hoping to looking forward to that lecture as well. So thanks again, Jonas, to you today.
Yeah, thank you. Goodbye.
And bye-bye. Thank you also to our online audience. And the recording, of course, will be again published on the transportplanning.ut.ee website, where you can also revisit all the previous and also upcoming lectures in this lecture series. Thank you and bye-bye.